pain is just a symptom of a level of dysfunction, right? It's not necessarily the issue that they're dealing with. It's a symptom of the issue. So even though someone's having pain, there's the way that I look at pain is that there's a pain threshold. And if you guys are watching this right now, if you're on YouTube, sick, you can see me. If not, go on YouTube so you can. I'm holding my hand up as a threshold level, right? So if this is pain threshold here, and we go above that, we're in pain. Below that, we're not in pain. I'll give you an example for me is that I have an area of structural damage in my right shoulder. I have a torn labrum on my right side that I've never gotten repaired. My left side, relatively healthy. It doesn't bother me. So in terms of the pain threshold, there's on the right side, I'm always going to be closer to, or in my case, even above that threshold where I'm actually in pain or feeling sensations in that area. But there's always going to be something that leads to that pain, right? And a shoulder labrum, yes, that's a pretty direct correlation. But if we're talking just generally, someone that experiences knee pain, maybe it gets worse the longer they walk, or they feel it when they're squatting, or when they're playing the sport that they're playing. There is something that's getting them closer and closer to this pain threshold that eventually they'll pass that threshold and they'll get into the point where they are experiencing pain. But just because they've passed that threshold, it doesn't mean that that's the issue. There's another thing in all of this, right? Is the x-axis of this graph is time, right? There's a level of dysfunction, and with that dysfunction, there's going to be time that passes and repetition of whatever they're doing that gets them to this threshold and past this threshold, right? So the pain is really just a symptom of the dysfunction that has led them down this route where now they have a trajectory towards pain. And the dysfunction is present before they feel pain. In something that is repetitive, or if it's compensatory, like say my shoulder, my left shoulder is relatively healthy. It's still somewhere on this map, on this pain threshold, on this chart, right? It's just much further from that pain threshold on any given day than my right shoulder is. So knowing that there's a structural difference in these two sides, that gives me the information that on my right side, I'm always closer to that pain threshold or above that pain threshold because there's a structural difference in that side, right? So there is a level of dysfunction around that, and the dysfunction is on a structural level. I think a lot of people without injury, the dysfunction is not necessarily structural, it's more functional, right? It's functional in the sense that the compensation pattern that they have, that they've developed, that is probably subconscious, it's something that they don't realize that they're doing, that with repetition over time, it accumulates into an issue that now is causing them to be above that pain threshold, that they're experiencing pain. And if this is a subconscious compensation, what that means is that even if they get out of that pain threshold by addressing the symptom of the pain, a lot of people, when they think knee pain, like, okay, what can we do for your knee? Let's do, I don't know, TKEs. Let's roll your IT band. Things that are very knee-centric in focus. That's treating the symptom of the pain. That's no different than me taking a couple ibuprofen and then go hitting a squat session, right? There's still something that's contributing to that pain. There's that level of dysfunction that is contributing to the pain that is underlying there, right? That's going to be ongoing unless we address that level of dysfunction, the thing that is creating dysfunction that's leading to pain. So that's kind of one of the principles that I want to talk about as we go through this, is that as we're having people that are coming in with symptoms, whether you're a practitioner or a trainer, strength coach, there's something that's leading them on this trajectory independent of what they're feeling. So if we take a detailed injury history for that person, and we know that, okay, they had an ACL repair 4 years ago, maybe they got to a point in their rehab where a lot of times people forget the injury or the the severity of the injury after the pain goes away, right? So they'll come in, they'll tell you, yeah, I had an ACL repair, but it's fine now. It's not an issue. And that may be very true to them, right? It may be sub threshold, but still there's a level of dysfunction and there's a compensation pattern that they've developed around that injury, where if we're talking ACL repair, how long was it before the surgery? Okay, they had the surgery. They're probably immobile for a certain amount of time, or non-weight bearing on that side for a certain amount of time. And then in that entire time, they've now learned a movement pattern that they subconsciously believe to be how they move now, that is creating a level of dysfunction that is contributing to the symptoms that they're actually having, right? And then even though they've gotten to a place through rehab where maybe they're not having any knee pain, or they have range of motion that suffices for them, they may not have the understanding that they're still on that dysfunction, or they still have that dysfunction that's predisposing them to be closer to that pain threshold over time. And that's something that the more structural these things are in nature, the more ongoing that care has to be, right? It's not like we're going to restore them to pre-injury status in their knee through their ACL in a rehab process. This is no longer an issue ever again. This is now something that they're always going to be predisposed to dysfunction. And dysfunction is a very general term, but really what I mean is a lack of biomechanical consistency through that area. It's going to contribute to the way that they're bearing weight, the musculature that they're loading, and realistically their symmetry over time. And that's a really easy way to look at this stuff. And that's kind of how I want to simplify assessment today, is that we'll talk about the crux or the principles around assessment that you should be looking for in order to understand that, okay, they've had this injury, they don't have pain, but there's something that's inhibiting them from performing at their best, or this is something that pops up every now and then, maybe when they're more fatigued or at higher volumes, higher intensities, is understanding that it's not that specific area that's an issue. It's the function, it's the integrated function of the whole system that's an issue. People that have knee pain, and then maybe later they'll come back and they have SI joint pain, or maybe it's shoulder pain on the contralateral side. It's these things are not connected, right? There's a link between all of these things, and they interplay with each other as we talk about things that are in a closed system, in terms of axial loading, in terms of the way that they're interacting with gravity, that are going to happen on an ongoing basis. So that's really where I want to take this. And really what we can boil this down to in terms of compensation is that there's an asymmetry in the way that someone's moving from side to side, which typically means, say they have knee pain, and that creates they're immobile for a period of time. And I'm not even talking ACL surgery. I'm talking, in most cases, again, independent to acute injury, like anatomical difference, like actual structural anatomical differences. Most things that we encounter in a gym setting, they're going to be more so a product of repetitive stress, of the way that someone is subconsciously moving, something they're not conscious of, that they're doing on a very repetitive basis. So really, the first line of defense here is building that conscious understanding of the way that they're moving. And to do that, we need to be able to make observations, and we need to understand that, okay, it's not necessarily that we need to know exactly what's going on or what's causing this. It's more so that we need to be able to interpret that there is a difference in the way that they're moving from the right side to the left side. And if we think of that, a lot of times what it manifests as is, very simply put, it's an overloading of certain tissues and an underloading of other tissues. And that's because of that subconscious movement pattern that's causing asymmetries, and we all have them, whether there's injury or not, and building some sort of conscious awareness around that. And once you find a pattern in this stuff, the idea is that pattern is likely not going to change. It's probably very deeply ingrained, And that's the reason that they're having these issues. So once we can identify that, yes, we always want to check in. We always want to continually be assessing, and assessing not necessarily like on a table, whatever that looks like. In your brain, assessment is just watching someone move, understanding how they should be moving. And the way that I like to think of this is building a gold standard of movement quality, right? And that's going to be something that's dictated by how we can be biomechanically sound in the way that we're moving through specific body regions, first in isolation, but then more so in integration. How we can start to understand how, we should be interacting through the core and the scapula and the shoulder, and the core and the pelvis and the knee and the foot, and working upstream and downstream in both ways. Because none of this stuff in real life, none of it happens in isolation.